So I'll go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Maureen Rajabali, and I'm actually the chairperson for the Midwest Aga Khan Conciliation and Arbitration Board. We have collaborated with the Association for Conflict Resolution Chicago chapter in putting on tonight's very timely and relevant program. So we've been looking forward to it and hope you have as well. Just a couple of housekeeping matters. If you need MCLE credit, please send an email at info@acrchicago.org. Include your license number and contact information, and we can take care of that. Further, please be sure to check out the website for ACR Chicago, which is acrchicago.org. This will give you information on programs happening in April and as well as coming up beyond that. Also, to let you know, we are recording tonight's session, so it will be on the website as well. So feel free to access that from there. I now have the pleasure of introducing two incredible speakers for tonight's event. We have Lisbeth M. Bulmash, who is an attorney and a neutral at the JAMS following nearly 20 years as a conflict resolution practitioner, and is also the co-founder of an ADR firm. She resolves civil, commercial, and probate disputes of all sizes, including complex multi-party disputes. Over the course of her career, Liz has been a mediator in Chicago, Ohio, and Texas. Liz is a graduate of the University of Michigan for her BA and the Boston University School of Law. She's a member of the State Bar of Texas's ADR Section Council Board, the Texas Mediators' Credentialing Association Board, as well as the Collin County Estate Planning and Probate Section Board. She's a frequent speaker on various ADR topics involving mediation, maintaining neutrality, and embracing diversity. And she's presented to a variety of organizations and law schools throughout the country. We also have here with us Sharmeen Lathani, who's a mediator for the Aga Khan Conciliation and Arbitration Board in the Central Region. She mediates cases related to matrimonial, commercial, and civil disputes, and also presents to attorney mediator organizations on topics such as maintaining neutrality in times of racial strife and embracing diversity in ADR. She currently serves as the vice chair of the Dallas Bar Association's ADR section and a council member for the State Bar of Texas ADR section. She professionally, she's also a senior attorney at the IRS Office of Chief Counsel. Sharmeen represents the IRS in U.S. Tax Court and advises the IRS on high-stakes collection matters, civil fraud cases, offshore compliance issues, preparer and promoter investigations, and abusive tax avoidance schemes. Sharmeen obtained her law degree from Vanderbilt Law School, where she received the Philip G. Davidson Award for Exemplary Leadership in Service to the Community. And she graduated from the University of Texas at Austin with highest honors, earning a Bachelor's of Science in Communication Studies. We welcome both of you this evening and are looking very much forward to your presentation. Please go ahead, take it away.
Thank you so much, Maureen, for having us and for that lovely introduction. And thank you, Shafiq and Christina, also for helping plan and arrange this with Sharmeen and I. We're delighted to be here. I just wanted to make one correction from the introduction, which is I never practiced as a mediator in Chicago. So I didn't want you to think that. I actually have practiced mediation in Michigan, Ohio, and Texas, but there was a lot to cover. So I just wanted to clarify that. In any event, when we were discussing what we should talk about today, we looked at where we've been in 2020 and 2021. I'm sure all of you have seen that commercial regarding 2020 with the lemons falling from the sky on the wedding party and on everyone during 2020. And that's kind of what it's felt like. And it's a lemonade commercial. It's kind of cute. What do you do when lemons are falling? But why is this issue important? We looked at 2020 into 2021, And, you know, we've been encumbered with just a litany, a melting pot of issues that have affected every facet of our lives. And I'll name a few. I don't want to regurgitate it, but, you know, first of all, principally 2020 hit us hard with COVID-19. And there was a lot of disagreement about how our local and national government should respond to COVID-19, what measures should be taken to contain it, masks, no masks, how the vaccine should be rolled out, whether kids should be in school in person or attending school virtually, what we should do to protect our seniors. We had a lot of political upheaval in the Democratic and Republican Party. It was Trump versus Biden. We had a very contentious presidential election and local elections, really regurgitating a lot of these different themes. It culminated in a impeachment proceeding after the election. We had a Capitol riot in January of 2021. We had a Black Lives Matter movement from the Floyd death, George Floyd death, and some other deaths around the country. And we had a lot of upheaval regarding what we should do, and people supportive of Black Lives Matter, people disagreeing with Black Lives Matter. We had a lot of upheaval about immigration, and we still do, and what we should be doing, anti-immigration sentiment, pro-immigration sentiment. We have a lot of anti-Asian sentiment right now, stemming from the Wuhan origin of COVID-19. And as recently as yesterday, the shootings at the massage parlor that were aimed at Asians. So right now we are looking at growing dissent and volatility everywhere. And those are I'm just touching on some of the issues. And COVID has affected so many people negatively, their businesses, their livelihoods, people facing eviction. It goes on and on, but we're in a full state of upheaval.
Absolutely, Liz. And we have to remember that our parties that we will be mediating for are the very people whose lives have been impacted by these events, right? Folks within our communities who are embroiled in personal conflict, who may be pent up with opinions about these events, with no real place to express their views or vent their emotions. So then the mediation likely becomes an outlet for opinions of these divisive issues to spill out. Against this backdrop that Liz described, we've created this presentation by weaving in examples, combining facts of real life cases that we either have mediated or are currently mediating. And we want the focus of today to be the following. If mediators find themselves in situations when they are mediating issues that are directly related and arising out of the events that Liz described, or when opinions or controversial topics infiltrate the discussion, either related or unrelated to the case, what strategies can mediators utilize to prevent derailment and achieve a meaningful and sustainable resolution? So as a logistical matter, before we dive right in, we will have a Q&A session at the end. So if you have any questions or comments, we would love to hear from you. You may submit your questions through the chat box, or you can unmute yourself during the Q&A and we'll hear from you live. So with that, we will dive right in to the presentation. So when Liz and I looked at this topic, we broke it up temporally, right? Looking at situations that a mediator may face during pre-mediation or during the actual mediation. And when you're looking at pre-mediation, you have to ask yourself, what are the goals of the pre-mediation phase? Well, first, we want to break the ice, right? We want to establish rapport with the parties. We want to be sure that the parties are comfortable with you as the mediator. Because don't forget, the mediation process could be grueling, right? We all know we've been in mediations where we've had to ask difficult questions to probe into the underlying root cause of a matter, which can be unsettling and stressful for the party. And at a time where all the parties are not necessarily sitting in the same room across from each other, building that connection early on is perhaps even more critical today in the age of virtual mediations than it was before 2020. You also want to take this opportunity to establish some ground rules. So either during the pre-mediation conference or in an opening statement, this is the mediator's opportunity to set the tone, explain the rules of the process, and establish your role as the mediator. So throughout this presentation, I will be giving you some examples of how in CABS mediations, we've been able to use these strategies. And before I do that, I just want to take a moment to give you a little bit of background on what CAB is, right? So as Mary may have mentioned, the Aga Khan Conciliation and Arbitration Board, that are known as CAB, this is the alternative dispute resolution body of the Ismaili Muslim community. For some context, we're the second largest Shia Muslim community with over 20 million Ismaili Muslims in the world. And we provide pro bono community mediation services for commercial, matrimonial, and civil disputes. And we aim to embrace a holistic approach to foster a system of healing wounds that may result from conflict. So keeping that in mind, in CABS mediations, something we've adopted in order to establish those ground rules is that we aim to set that tone in a formal opening statement by highlighting the common ethical values of mutual respect, of dignity, acting in good faith, with integrity, and showing kindness and compassion. We even ask the parties for a verbal commitment to act within these ethical principles. As the gatekeeper, this is also the place where the mediator can emphasize that there is no place for inappropriate commentary, and that when you as the mediator do sense a controversial issue or topic percolating in the background that's unrelated to the facts at hand, the mediator may advise the parties to tread carefully and respectfully. And we found that laying this groundwork ahead of time will help the mediator also gauge the party's reaction early on, right? And really sense how much animosity there is between the parties and how far apart they really are. And that's going to be very valuable for the mediator as the case continues to develop a strategy for the case.
Lastly, the front load preparation is different. In a pre-mediation session with the parties, you want to get a sense of some of the logistics with these Zoom mediations especially. It's very important to know, and I've learned the hard way, whether or not, where the parties are going to be, what kind of Wi-Fi they're going to be using. If you have a party on one side with an attorney and a client, or a multi-party case, where is everyone going to be? Are they going to be, is the attorney and his client going to be in the same room? If they're going to be in the same room, are they going to be sharing a screen? You will not be able to see one face or another. Are they going to be wearing masks for safety? You will not be able to mediate well, not being able to read the visual expressions of the parties you're talking to. So, these logistical things are very important to find out, what internet they're using. Are they at a Starbucks? You don't want them at a Starbucks. We have confidentiality issues. That's a whole other topic, but, it allows the mediator in the pre-mediation session to kind of tag on to what Charmaine has said. They really, as mediators, we want to know whether we can start with the joint session or whether there's so much animosity that could really blow things to bits. I mean, I'm a real proponent of the joint session, but with Zoom and with some of the controversies that we're dealing with, you have to tread carefully, and you want to know what people's thoughts are and what they're comfortable with. And you want to give them a sense or get a sense for what's already taken place. I find in these Zoom mediations, there is a great deal of pre-mediation preparation that occurs. I think it helps mediators be more successful in the moment, and especially with this topic, to know when something might seep in and be a better reactionary to things and understanding, how it fits into the dispute itself and the history of the parties. So the first example that I would like to utilize in the pre-mediation context was a mediation I recently participated in. And in calling the parties ahead of time in advance of the dispute, I called one of the attorneys, and it was during the ice storm that Texas recently experienced. And it wasn't, at the beginning of the ice storm, but clearly his children were at home in the background yelling, and, he was very frazzled and he wasn't available to speak to me. And I was very, tried to be very non-judgmental, tried to relate to him. Oh, my house is a mess. This has been just crazy. What's going on here? I totally understand. And I basically said to him, listen, why don't you contact me? I'll give you my cell number, and let's talk before the mediation at a time that's very convenient for me. You can call me anytime. You can call me over the weekend, whatever works best for you, because I get that you're stressed right now and it's not a good time for you. But in addition, in this particular case, it was clear that this attorney, was not doing his job. And so I know that Charmaine will talk about some of the resources we can point people to, but if that's not available, we need to think about how we can add to and help the process. And so in this particular context, I recognized the mental strain this guy was on and that he was under. And I contacted one of the other parties. I had asked him in our short conversation, hey, have you talked to so-and-so? Oh, no, they haven't reached out to me yet. And that really wasn't how it works, but I encouraged that other party to reach out to him in advance of the mediation so that they could know where they stood, before the mediation started. So as the mediator, there are things you can do to help things along. And it's really important to not be judgmental, to work with the parties and understand some of the strains that this time period has for people who have animals and have children running underfoot when they're in the middle of Zooming.
Absolutely, Liz. Now more than ever, we should remember that pre-mediation is a time to recognize the mental health strains that may be caused by the events of COVID and how they may be impacting a party's or an attorney's performance. And it allows you to consider your limitations as a mediator, right? And what resources then can you offer to meet the needs of that party? So for example, CAB mediators are trained to identify situations in which parties may need support or services that go beyond CAB's competencies, like mental health counseling or skill building. So at the appropriate time, which can be before, during, or even after the mediation, CAB mediators may offer to refer parties to CAB's sister institutions of social governance, such as the Ismaili Communities Social Welfare Board or its Economic Planning Board for these types of services. Another tip that I would offer is something that we've initiated, is to maintain a repository of articles, of literature, recordings, or presentations that are targeted towards these topics of emotional health, of self-care, and anger management, and then share these resources with the parties at the appropriate time. And you may find that, offering this additional support, especially during these difficult times, will help parties truly heal from all of the effects of the conflict inside and out.
The second example that we had, or that I was involved in, was a lawsuit involving, a typical fender bender, not very run of the mill. And before the mediation, I don't think liability was really at issue. It was more or less damages in this case. It was, one car hitting another. And I called the plaintiff attorney ahead of the mediation, and I called the defense attorney. And it was very interesting when I talked to the plaintiff attorney. He disclosed to me that the plaintiff's deposition had recently been taken, and that during the deposition, it was clear that she had been adversely affected during COVID. Apparently, her fiance was shot and killed in a random shooting. The plaintiff was facing eviction. She was unable to pay her rent and was clearly concerned about being evicted. I know they had put off rent eviction, but it was looming over her due to job loss during COVID-19. And she had all the typical, pains from the accident as well. And so it was interesting because it really brought to light how much empathy we really need to have, because this plaintiff was even more vulnerable given the effects of the pandemic.
Mhm.
And, it's clear that we want to have sensitivity to this. And we want to, when I turned to the defense counsel, wanted to make sure that they were going to approach this plaintiff with dignity and with sensitivity too, not going too far because I'm in the middle. But I think that, we have to discuss, the real losses that people have suffered, and you take the plaintiff where you find them. So the fact that COVID made things 10 times worse, it's still going to be a reality of the case.
Mhm. Absolutely. You're absolutely right, Liz. You want to establish sensitivity to the people who have suffered, like you said, very real and traumatic losses during the pandemic. And that may mean from the onset, right? During pre-mediation, your first conversation with the party, consciously weaving in empathetic responses into your dialogue, right? To empathize with their vulnerabilities using, reflective listening, or even your tone and other nonverbal cues, but without necessarily agreeing with the party's sentiments so as to not break your neutrality. And having learned about plaintiff's circumstances during pre-mediation, you can strategize to bring this out during the mediation strategically, so that you can appropriately reality check with the other party at the right time. You want the parties to consider, what is a decision maker going to focus on, right? If this case were to go to trial, what would a jury think about the situation? And if the decision maker will be considerate of the plaintiff's problems, then perhaps the defense counsel needs to be sensitive to plaintiff's plight. And this is ultimately what may move the needle once the parties are in ZOPA, right? The zone of possible agreement.
Well, we were lucky in this case because defense counsel really got it right away. I didn't have, to really convince them. But I do want to say this case had definite racial undertones here. The plaintiff attorney was an African-American, his client was an African-American, and the other side, I don't think they didn't need to be schooled on being sensitive to where this plaintiff was and how a jury would react, or the judge. I mean, I think they absolutely got it. But in another case, the mediator is going to be the one that's going to have to test the questions and say, are you really seeing what's in front of you?
Mhm.
And are you really empathizing with the facts and what a jury or judge is going to see here?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Anyway.
So this next example, most of the time, both parties may approach you after they have agreed to mediate. But in some situations, one party may have some hesitation, maybe because they want their day in court, or they've never been to a mediation before. And this is a situation that I've come across in many cases, because remember, CAB practices community mediation, right? Which is a voluntary process. So very often you'll find that one party is on board to mediate, but the pro se other party, we'll call them respondent, may be reluctant. So how do you get the other party to come to the table? Now, in a post 2020 era, if you will, when we are approaching that other party, we have to consider how this external noise of hotbed issues has affected them, right? We want to remember that this outside pressure that they may be feeling with nowhere to vent, now that party is embroiled in conflict. So there is this added layer of negativity on top of that pressure. So you definitely want to avoid a cold and transactional interaction, right? You want to build compassion and empathy from the get-go to educate the respondent pro se party on the benefits of mediation. And during your conversation, you want to create an environment of trust by letting the respondent share their side of the story with you and the goals that they want to accomplish, to the point where they themselves become invested. And then, as the mediator, repeat those same goals back to the party, but through a neutral lens, and emphasize where mediation and an open dialogue could help. What do you think, Liz?
Yeah, I think that, building that rapport is so important. And I also think it's really important to reality test with
Oh, beautiful.
a pro se person. Excuse me,
I
I'm
think I
just
have an
going to
answer.
mute this person. I'm sorry. Anyway, especially with a pro se party, it's very important to explain to them at least what we're looking at in today's court in terms of the backlog right now that we're seeing across the country with courts that have not been able to try cases for a year. And that it may take a long time to get your day in court. And does that person want to live with the upheaval of conflict haunting their life for that year and the uncertainty of what may happen in court? But I would caution, two things to look out for. One is you really need to address the Wi-Fi iniquities that are taking place in Zoom. When you have a pro se party, you want to make sure that they have access to good Wi-Fi. You want them to test their Wi-Fi ahead of time, that they're in a private place, so that they are not at a disadvantage during a Zoom mediation, because that could really set things off kilter. And also with my pro se, the cases I've had where I have a pro se party, I'm very, very careful to make them sign some kind of document, explaining to them that I'm their mediator. I will not be their attorney. I will not be giving them legal advice. And they are, they've been advised to get legal counsel, and they're going forth with the mediation without any legal counsel. So that's the only thing I would add to the compassionate talk.
Absolutely. And that line, especially with pro se parties, you want to make sure that line is not crossed. And, like you said, sign something beforehand where you explain to the party that they confirm they understood that we cannot give legal advice or professional advice.
Right. The next example is, you're on a call with an attorney, and this can happen whenever. It doesn't, it's more likely to happen now, and you're breaking the ice. You're talking with the other attorney, and the attorney, spills out some of his own or her own personal bias on the impeachment proceedings or on immigration or on any one of these topics. And, you really, as a mediator, don't want to be reactionary because obviously, as we talked about before, your goal is to make the other attorney feel comfortable with you and trust you. So, what I would choose to do and what I have chosen to do in this situation is to say, we're at I've seen this type of politics and thoughts about controversial issues, come into a mediation and really pollute the water. And, because for every person that supports your point of view, the other side may not. And you don't want to offend them. If it's not related to our case, I don't mind us talking about it here, or, you expressing your opinion. But in the context of the mediation, I've seen it really poison the water. And so, you want to avoid creating friction with others. So if you have an opportunity, explaining to the attorney that, these issues are so volatile, and yeah, I get where you're coming from, not agreeing or disagreeing, but, getting them to refocus on the dispute itself and what's important to resolving the dispute will go a long way to avoiding, blowing things out of proportion at the mediation, because you kind of want to take this opportunity to school them on, not doing this during the mediation.
Yeah, very timely example, Liz. The next example that we would offer is actually a matrimonial case that I had, where we were helping a husband and wife finalize their divorce settlement. So we're in a Zoom mediation waiting for the wife to join, and the husband is on. And so the mediation session hasn't begun. And he's mentioned in the past that he's a frontline worker at a hospital and he treats COVID patients all day. And then he discloses that he refuses to vaccinate because he doesn't want to be a guinea pig to the vaccine. Now, that comment caught me a bit off guard, right? And I immediately wanted to respond. So while the goal in pre-mediation is to build rapport, comments like these can throw even us neutrals off. And so, we have to remember that we as mediators also carry our own baggage, right? We have our own thoughts and opinions on these burning issues. We may have family members who are also frontline workers who may have gotten sick and even died from COVID. So in an environment of heightened societal tensions, you want to keep the warm-up focused on the goals that you want to accomplish that we discussed in an earlier slide. But if comments like this do creep in, refrain from passing judgment because you are the neutral in the room. And lashing out with your personal opinions can break your neutrality even before the mediation begins.
The only thing I would add, Charmaine, is that I think that as neutrals and as mediators, we can practice in our everyday life how to not be reactive.
Yeah.
Because, I have friends and I have acquaintances and they've said things that I can't believe they came out of their mouth. But I've been very non-reactive and I've been very neutral in my response. And I think it's been a good exercise. So, you might want to think about doing that so that when you do get in a situation like this and you are caught off guard, you know how to react and you're not reactive.
Mm-hmm.
And it really, could save the day.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And our social media footprint is very permanent these days. So
yes, it is. And Charmaine and I have been, we really are very, in previous CLEs, we've gone out on a limb to say that mediators and neutrals should not be posting, very controversial and political things. And I know that's not every neutral here or mediator is going to agree with that, but I think that, you don't want to be viewed as in a different camp than the parties that are in front of you. You want to be viewed as someone who is Switzerland in the middle and is a true neutral. So, we just say that as an aside.
Absolutely.
So next we're moving to family disputes during mediation. And we have like 4 different examples of where these issues can come up in a family law context. Let's say you have a divorce and you have mom has elderly parents and she wants anyone coming into contact with the parents, her parents, who are elderly, including the kids who are 16 and 17, to get vaccinated as soon as possible. The husband is, they're an interracial couple, and the husband is not in, he doesn't believe in vaccines, and he really doesn't want his children to get vaccinated. So you have to consider, when you're looking at what the issues are that are central, and maybe you'll know about this. You wouldn't know about this ahead of time, but it'll come up during the mediation. And you want to know what is the most effective way to manage the conversation, using the joint session or using the caucus session strategically. I mean, if there are a lot of controversies between this couple, you may be best off ironing some things out separately in the caucus. I mean, I'm a true believer in the joint session, but knowing what the hot points are during the mediation, you may be best off alternating your strategy and trying to minimize the conflict at the mediation.
Yeah. Like Liz said, these examples may come up in many of your cases, and we've tried to put in the types of examples with salient points and takeaways that you can use if you find yourselves in these types of situations. The distinction in the next two examples is really recognizing when the comment that's made is related to an issue that you are mediating, or external noise that's going to distract the parties from progress. So for example, in a family law case, I had a husband who was equating the wife's behavior towards him to that of the Capitol rioters in front of his wife. So that's clearly noise, right? And you want to ask, how do you effectively steer the parties away from that kind of rhetoric? Right after that comment is made, and before anyone else speaks, the mediator should step in and remind everybody of the ground rules, right? The parties committed in the opening to respect each other and refrain from making insulting comments about each other, because these types of comments will certainly not help them come to an agreement. Now contrast that with this other case where the husband and wife were in a contentious custody battle over their 3-year-old daughter. Wife was adamant that husband cannot see the daughter unless he masks the entire time. And husband refused to mask. So mask versus no mask debate followed. So when we probed deeper during the exploration stage, we learned that wife comes from a well-to-do family. She has a master's degree, stable job, and with the financial backing of her family, she could comfortably transition to working from home through all of 2020 and never needed to step outside of the house. Husband, on the other hand, lost his job during COVID. He was crashing with a friend while we were in mediation because finances were tight. And he had found a job at a retail shop inside a grocery store, working very long hours and constantly interacting with the public. So on the surface level, this was a debate on a COVID-related issue, to mask or not to mask. But it actually highlighted deeper disparities between the parties, right? In terms of education level, lifestyle, family support, and finances, and really gave us a better understanding of the root cause of why this marriage fell apart in the first place. And then we could strategize together to help the parties build some common ground.
The last example, the virtual versus in-person learning, that issue is one of the most popular issues in family law cases that is brought to the forefront during COVID, which is one parent is really, afraid for their kids to be in-person learning, and the other parent wants the child, to be in person because they don't learn as well on the virtual learning, or they have a learning, issue that prevents them from really being engaged online. And so there is a lot of debate going back and forth, and that will continue, I think, until we are safely able to go back to school in person. I haven't had a case like that, obviously. My focus is not on family law disputes, but it is something that you need to be aware of, and it will be part and parcel of a lot of divorce mediations.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
The next case, is a breach of contract case involving a lease agreement. There were a lot of commercial lease agreements and, domestic lease agreements that were impacted by COVID-19. And, the law is very unsettled on what the document means, because no one really considered COVID-19 when these contracts were signed. And so, there will be a lot of rhetoric, coming in a mediation with a lease agreement like the one I had, where there's a breach of contract and you have parties that, signed a contract long before they ever anticipated there'd be a COVID-19. And one party wants to hold, the lessor wants to hold the leasee's feet to the fire, to the just straight out terms of, you owe me, X number of months and I want my money and blah, blah, blah. And the leasee is, oh no, this is a force majeure. It's it's certainly an exception, and I should be relieved of the obligations of the lease. And so, there is a great opportunity for a lot of other noise to come in. And so you really, in this case, it's more important to point the parties to what's important in this case. And what's important is what the language of the agreement says and how that's going to be interpreted, whether it's a jury trial or whether it's, the judge is going to decide that, who's the decision maker. It's really important to focus on not the political, but what really matters. And in this case, there's not a lot of case law, and it's not established. There's case law in different camps, but it's still, a wild card as to how the courts are going to interpret these clauses and apply them to the facts and circumstances we have given COVID-19. So focusing on that uncertainty, the court delays, the other issues may be more relevant than entering into debate about what the government should do, what someone should be obligated to do, and when someone should be relieved of their obligations.
You're right, Liz. The law around a lot of these issues is continuously evolving. And when you're thinking about that, think about the jurisdiction that you're in too, right? And how the law is changing with respect to that jurisdiction, keeping that in mind. So the next case is also a breach of contract case involving a lease agreement. So this is the case that I had right as we saw, I think, a resurgence of the anti-immigration debate. It involved a breach of a commercial lease agreement for a property that had, a huge truck stop, a gas station, convenience store, and a fast food chain. So the tenant was a female. She was a recent immigrant, and this was her first big business venture. The landlord was a well-established businessman in the United States for 30 plus years. He had a portfolio of many diversified investments, and this was just one of his businesses. So the landlord brought up anti-immigrant comments in a derogatory sense, right? The tenant is new to the country and her lack of experience and her failure to understand how to run a business in this country and the inability to adopt the American way of life, that's why she drove the business to the ground. And now she's coming back to me to recoup her losses by seeking rent abatements and forgiveness of past due amounts. I should have never leased the business to her, and she's not getting a penny of reprieve from me. So this kind of commentary, right? If it, it's noise, and it can certainly thwart any good faith that you've built in the mediation so far. So how do you approach it? Well, consider who can influence who when you're thinking about mediators, parties, attorneys, and other stakeholders, right? So for example, CAB uses the co-mediator model, keeping in mind that some parties may relate to some mediators in better ways than others, maybe because of background, of gender, age, or profession. And so that's why there are always two mediators assigned to every case. So here, my co-mediator and I internally strategized. And just like the landlord, my co-mediator was a male. Both were of the same age, similar background, and comparable standing within the community. So between the two of us, we decided that my co-mediator should lead that conversation with the landlord to steer the dialogue back to the facts. My co-mediator alluded to our opening statement where the parties verbally affirmed, right, that mediation is a respectful, non-judgmental forum, and that comments like these can certainly be very disrespectful to the other party. And they're also pulling them further apart from coming to an agreement. So we felt that was very effective coming from a co-mediator who had a lot of similarities with the landlord, and eventually the landlord dropped it. So whether you practice in a solo setting or in a co-mediation model, use the dynamics between the parties, the mediator, the attorneys, and other potential stakeholders to your advantage. What do you think, Liz?
Yeah, and I've seen that in a lot of cases, and it's helped me get the parties to yes, because sometimes the real decision maker is not sitting in the Zoom mediation and is somewhere else. And the party is texting that person to ask what they think of X, Y, and Z. So they're really going to influence and be the real decision maker, whether they're on the Zoom camera or not. So you really want to, when you're caucusing with these parties, really probe, what they think, and sometimes it comes out, I really have to talk to my spouse about this. I can't agree to anything. And so you're not going to get this done unless you involve these other people. And you need to understand who is the real decision maker, whether they're present or not. Yeah. And that goes for any mediation. But I agree with you, using the people that work the best together is the best way to yes, especially with difficult conversations like these.
Yep.
So the next case, and this is a current case that is brewing in a local community college. Their COVID-19 response was less than stellar. Most colleges had statistics of how many current cases, they had restrictions, they had preventative measures to prevent the spread of COVID. They suspended in-person classes, et cetera. And this local community college did not. And one of the tenured professors, actually there were three of them, one of them went on Twitter and made some, disparaging comments about the university, the community college. It's not a university, but community college, about their lack of COVID-19 response and, making suggestions about what they should do. And when as of late, recently, 3 of these professors, their contracts were not renewed. And so that has set off an absolute firestorm because they were women. Some of them were minority. I think 2 of the women were minorities. Women are sometimes considered minorities. And it felt very discriminatory. It felt like a retaliatory discharge. So they're in the process of appealing it through the process within the community college, but there's been protests on the campus of the community college. And I do anticipate that this is a case where a lawsuit will be filed. And, were you to mediate this case, there would be a lot of off-color comments perhaps coming in about, very negative things about them spurring the protests, about their, combative nature and et cetera, et cetera. And so your efforts would be, to take an attorney aside and discuss the issue and put an end to any, very negative behavior at the mediation and kind of rise above what would be the appropriate reaction here. What the law says, was it retaliatory? Was it warranted? What was their record as employees at this university? If they were tenured, they obviously were well thought of by their students. They had good reviews until this COVID-19. And so there's going to be a lot of factual stuff that's going to be relevant here.
Interesting. Go
yes.
ahead.
No, I just wanted to throw in this example because it is something we're going to see a lot of these wrongful discharge because employees have been very vocal on the lack of COVID-19, and some of them have been, wrongfully discharged. And so it is going to be a very common case that we're going to see in different contexts.
And so far, if you've noticed in the examples we've provided, when political rhetoric comes up, it's been noise, right? It's been external, outside of the mediation. Here, that right to express that political rhetoric is the case, the issue that you're mediating in the case. So you're absolutely right. It'll be very interesting to see how some of these cases fare, either in mediation or in litigation.
So the last example is a real case. It was a guardianship case that I recently mediated, and it involved 3 siblings, a brother and 2 sisters, and they were in a full-blown dispute over their elderly mother's care and whether she should have a guardianship. Brother and sister on one side and another sister on the other side, and they lawyered up. And there was an attorney ad litem and a guardian ad litem involved. And the interesting thing about this case is underlying there were some issues because the sister that was the black sheep lived in another state, and she had a girlfriend, and brother and sister on the other side disapproved of her lifestyle because she was a lesbian, and they did not like her female partner. And so it was interesting because that was an element and an underlying issue in this case. Where COVID-19 came in is that there were a lot of logistical limitations to how we could handle mom's care that were caused by the pandemic. For example, mom was in an assisted living, like a nursing home, and access to mom was limited during COVID and still is today. Visitation was very limited and guarded because they wanted to protect the elderly population from contracting COVID. And so there was a lot of modifying that had to take place during the mediation of the expectations of the parties with what the new reality is. I mean, I think, one sibling thought, mom could travel and be shared, among the siblings. Not likely during COVID. And with the frail, the mother's care. You know, she's just was in such a frail state because of COVID. So my strategy here was to really use the caucuses to meet with each side and let each side really have their day in court to vent to me how this came about, the dispute, you know, what their relationship was like with their sibling, you know, and they could vent about, you know, why this was important to them. And then once they had vented, to get both sides to really focus on the goal here. And the goal is to have their elderly mother not be upset by conflict from her adult children, and to receive the best medical care with the resources she has left in her trust. And so, you know, getting them to focus on that was really, really critical in terms of, you know, eliminating the conflict and getting this thing settled, which we did.
You know, you mentioned that one of the siblings was a lesbian, had a female partner, and you know, it really that example really shows maybe not in this case, but in another case where things could have been different, right? Where that may have been a very integral issue to the case. So these concepts of diversity and inclusion that you know we have emerged from the Black Lives Matter movement, even you know the violent crimes that we are seeing against Asian Americans as recent as yesterday, a racial reckoning, if you will, that our country has witnessed over the last year. These conversations about inclusion, about diversity, are not going anywhere, right? They're here to stay. And defining, you know, they've also prompted this dialogue of what it means to not just understand, but embrace the other. And defining the other across broader differences in terms of gender, in terms of sexual orientation, like in your example, race, culture, background. And if these concepts are intertwined and buried within the issues in a future mediation, they could emerge where one party feels that the other is less deserving than, right, of some equal status because of these differences we described. So while, you know, it sounds like, Liz, you know, in your case, there was this tension between the siblings percolating in the background. It seems that you managed the dialogue very effectively. You know, by rallying around mom and focusing on her care, the parties found some common ground. And despite their differences, they ultimately, hopefully, this ultimately helped to heal their relationship and restore some harmony within the family.
Yeah, I think it's a great example of focusing on the greater good
Mm-hmm.
and letting some of the differences and some of the things that we can nitpick on from COVID, you know, fall to the background.
Yeah.
You know, and that's kind of what happened in that case.
Yeah, exactly. So we've thrown a lot at you today. We've given you a litany of examples of specific situations in which mediators may find themselves. And we hope these examples have been instructive in outlining key takeaways that mediators can use when they are challenged to make sure that the mediation is not hindered and to promote successful settlement. Because you know these effects of the global pandemic, the presidential election and its aftermath, the vaccine rollout, and this ongoing diversity dialogue really have affected all of us and our parties in many ways. And the reality is that issues related to and opinions about these events are bound to come into our mediation. So remember, keep the conversation focused on the issues at hand. And that could mean being the gatekeeper for inappropriate commentary or recognizing an opportunity to probe deeper for an underlying issue. Keep yourself neutral and avoid being reactive, because you know being reactive will throw off how the parties view you as a neutral and ultimately undermine your goal of building common ideas with the parties.
And, focus on preparation, because preparation is your friend in these Zoom mediations. They allow you to anticipate when you're going to have problems that may seep into the mediation. They allow you to set the tone and set the ground rules to prevent things from getting derailed. Use your opening statements and your pre-mediation calls to establish your authority, but also to use your prowess to help the parties prepare and to put their best foot forward to getting something done at mediation. It's very important to having an effective mediation.
Absolutely. So with that, that is all the talking that we're going to do today. We'd love to hear from you. I have not been monitoring the chat box, but I think Christina and Shafiq, if there are any questions in the chat box, feel free to throw them our way. Or if anybody wants to make any comments or ask any questions, feel free to unmute yourself. I'm going to stop sharing so that we can all be on Zoom.
I don't see any questions in the chat box, but we can open up for a few minutes if people have got questions. Mark, do you see anything in the chat box?
I do not. I'll just make a couple comments. I want to thank Lisbeth and Charmaine for the program this evening. It was very good. Your insights and observations are very helpful to all of us. I'm happy that you were able to join us, and I'm happy to see everybody from CAB here tonight with us also. As I said, we have a long-standing relationship with them. Also, our next program is going to be on April 13th at 5:30, also via Zoom. You can sign up for that on the ACR-Chicago website. If you have anything else to follow up or anything, questions or getting involved with ACR-Chicago, you can contact us at info@acrchicago.org. Let's see if there's anything else.
I think that's it. And if nobody has questions, then we can wrap it up.
Well, thank you guys for, being an attentive audience. We just wanted to raise some issues. I'd love to hear from you if you've had any experiences with this in your mediations. I think a lot of this is just coming to the forefront now, but I believe we will see a lot of this. So I hope it'll give you some food for thought in terms of how you're going to address some of these situations and anticipate how to handle some of these problems.
Yeah. Liz and I were joking that we almost have to update our presentation every day because there's something in the news every day that's, relevant to what we're talking about. So thank you, ACR, for giving us the platform to speak about this very timely topic. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. And until next time. Thank you, guys.
I'll just say the tools that you've given us be very helpful as things rapidly change. As you noted, every single day, it seems like it's something new, but you've given us some very good tools to work with. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much for having us. We appreciate you were such a great audience. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, bye-bye.
Good night, everybody. Stay safe.
Stay safe.